Imagine a time when questioning the church could cost you your life. Picture a world where a single word, a single challenge to authority could send you to the stake or the dungeon. Now imagine a man who not only questioned the mighty Catholic Church, but led a revolution that would transform an entire nation forever. This is the story of John Knox, a name that would shake the very foundations of 16th century Scotland. A thunderous voice that echoed through the misty highlands, challenging kings, defying queens, and reshaping the spiritual landscape of an entire country. In the early 1600s, Scotland was a powder keg of religious and political tension. The Protestant Reformation, which had sparked to life with Martin Luther in Germany, had spread like wildfire across Europe. And in Scotland, it found its most fierce and uncompromising leader in John Knox. Picture him, a former galley slave turned revolutionary preacher, a man whose words were sharper than any sword, more powerful than any royal decree. Knox wasn't just a theologian, he was a revolutionary who would challenge the absolute power of the Catholic Church and give birth to a new religious movement that would change Scotland forever. This isn't just a story about religion. This is a tale of rebellion, of courage, of a single individual who dared to challenge the most powerful institution of his time. How did a man go from being a prisoner on a French galley to becoming the thundering voice of the Scottish Reformation? How did he stand toe-to-toe with Mary, Queen of Scots, and emerge as the architect of a new religious identity? If you love diving into the mysteries of history, if you're fascinated by stories of how ordinary people can change the course of entire nations, then buckle up. We're about to embark on an incredible journey through one of the most dramatic religious transformations in European history. Are you ready to uncover the shocking truth about how Scotland broke free from centuries of Catholic tradition? Are you prepared to meet the man who single-handedly reshaped an entire nation's spiritual and political landscape? Don't miss this incredible story. Like and subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles and join us as we unveil the dramatic tale of John Knox and the Scottish Reformation, a revolution that would echo through centuries. Before the Reformation, the Catholic Church in Scotland wasn't just an institution. It was an empire of power, wealth, and unchecked authority. Imagine a world where the Church's influence penetrated every single aspect of Scottish life, from the misty highlands to the bustling towns. But beneath the polished surface of religious devotion, a darker reality was brewing. Corruption wasn't just a whispered rumor, it was an open secret. Bishops lived like princes, accumulating vast lands and incredible wealth. Church officials sold forgiveness like market traders selling produce. Want to be absolved of your sins? Just pay the right price. Struggling with guilt? Here's a certificate of indulgence that will supposedly clear your spiritual slate. The ordinary people of Scotland were watching, and they were growing increasingly frustrated. The gap between the Church's proclaimed holy mission and its actual practices was becoming impossible to ignore. Priests who preached about poverty lived in magnificent estates. Church leaders who spoke about moral virtue were often engaged in the most immoral behaviors imaginable. And then something extraordinary started happening. Whispers of change began drifting across the European continent. New ideas were spreading, radical concepts that challenged the absolute power of the Catholic Church. These revolutionary thoughts traveled from Germany, from Switzerland, finding fertile ground in the hearts of those who had long suffered under ecclesiastical oppression. Now here's a fascinating piece of history that might surprise you. One of the key figures in this upcoming religious revolution, John Knox, had an incredible backstory that few people know. Before becoming the thundering voice of the Scottish Reformation, Knox was actually a galley slave. That's right, chained to a French ship, rowing under the most brutal conditions imaginable. This experience wasn't just a footnote in his biography. It was a crucible that forged his character. Imagine spending years rowing under the merciless sun, your back breaking, your spirit tested daily. Such an experience doesn't just change a man, It transforms him completely. It was during those grueling years that Knox developed an unbreakable spirit of resistance, a burning desire for freedom that would later translate into his religious and political activism. Those years of captivity planted the seeds of rebellion. They gave Knox a visceral understanding of oppression, whether it was the physical chains of slavery or the spiritual chains of a corrupt religious system. He wasn't just fighting a theological battle, he was fighting for human liberation. The Scottish landscape was ready for revolution. Years of ecclesiastical abuse had created a powder keg of resentment. All it needed was a spark, and John Knox was about to provide that spark in the most dramatic way possible. Get ready to dive deeper into one of the most fascinating religious transformations in human history. The Scottish Reformation wasn't just a religious movement. It was a profound social revolution that would reshape an entire nation's destiny. Forget everything you know about quiet, reserved religious leaders. John Knox was nothing like that. He was a spiritual tornado, a revolutionary whose voice could shake royal palaces and challenge entire religious systems. Imagine a man so powerful with words that even a queen trembled at the sound of his name. John Knox wasn't just a theologian. He was a revolutionary wrapped in a preacher's robes, a man who transformed religious debate into a battlefield of ideas. His life reads like an epic adventure novel. Exiled multiple times, imprisoned, constantly hunted. Knox didn't just survive these challenges, he thrived on them. Each persecution only made his message more powerful. Each exile only amplified his influence. He was the kind of leader who would look persecution in the eye and laugh, turning every obstacle into a platform for his radical message. His preaching wasn't just speaking, it was a thunderous performance that could electrify entire congregations. Witnesses describe him as a man with a voice that could cut through stone, a presence so intense that people would be transformed simply by hearing him speak. When Knox stepped onto a platform, he didn't just deliver a sermon, he unleashed a spiritual revolution. And Queen Mary Stuart, the mere mention of his name would reportedly make her tremble. Here was a preacher so powerful that he could challenge a monarch directly, criticizing her Catholic faith without fear. In a time when challenging royal authority could mean instant death, Knox stood fearlessly, speaking truth to power with a ferocity that was unprecedented. But Knox wasn't just about destruction. He was a builder of ideas, of a new religious vision, of a different kind of spiritual community. Where the Catholic Church had created a hierarchy with priests as intermediaries, Knox envisioned a direct relationship between people and God. No more middlemen, no more corrupt systems. Just pure, unfiltered faith. His revolutionary approach extended beyond religion. Knox was essentially creating a new model of social organization, challenging not just religious practices, but entire power structures. He believed that religious reform was fundamentally about human liberation, freeing people from spiritual, political, and social chains. Imagine a man who could transform an entire nation's spiritual landscape through the sheer power of his conviction. A man who went from being a galley slave to becoming the most feared and respected religious leader in Scotland. John Knox wasn't just a reformer, he was a force of nature. His legacy wasn't just about changing religious practices. He was rewriting the very DNA of Scottish society, creating a new model of spiritual and social engagement that would influence generations to come. Get ready to dive deeper into the incredible story of the man who would reshape Scotland forever, John Knox. The revolutionary preacher who feared no one, challenged everything, and changed history with nothing more than his voice and his unbreakable spirit. Picture a clash of titans, a fiery preacher against a royal queen. This wasn't just a religious dispute. This was a battle that would determine the very soul of Scotland. On one side stood Mary Stuart, the young Catholic queen, beautiful, passionate, and absolutely convinced of her divine right to rule. Raised in the French court, she embodied centuries of royal Catholic tradition. To her, the Protestant Reformation wasn't just a religious movement, it was a direct threat to everything she believed in. On the other side was John Knox, the thundering Protestant reformer, a man who feared no crown, who would look a queen in the eye and denounce her faith without a moment's hesitation. Where Mary saw tradition, Knox saw corruption. Where she saw divine right, he saw human oppression. Their conflict was epic and personal. Mary, with her elegant French education and Catholic upbringing, represented the old world. Knox, with his revolutionary ideas and fierce preaching, represented a new order. Every time he spoke, he wasn't just challenging her religious beliefs, he was challenging her entire system of power. Imagine the scene. Knox would stand in his pulpit, delivering sermons so powerful that they would echo beyond the church walls. He would directly criticize the Queen, calling her out for her Catholic faith, her political decisions, her very way of life. And Mary, she would hear these words and tremble, not just with anger, but with a genuine fear of the power of his message. This wasn't just a religious disagreement. This was a fundamental battle about who would control Scotland's future. Would it be the traditional monarchy, backed by centuries of Catholic tradition, or would it be the new Protestant vision of a society where power was more distributed, where religious authority wasn't concentrated in a few hands? Knox wasn't just a preacher, he was a political revolutionary. He believed that religious reform and political reform were two sides of the same coin. Every sermon was a political statement. Every critique of the Catholic Church was also a critique of the monarchical system. Mary Stuart tried everything to silence him. She summoned him, challenged him, attempted to marginalize his influence. But Knox was like a spiritual wildfire. The more you tried to suppress him, the more powerful he became. Their conflict symbolized something much larger than their personal dispute. It was the clash between tradition and change, between an old world dying and a new world struggling to be born. Mary represented a system that had ruled for centuries. Knox represented a radical new vision of society, more democratic, more direct, more focused on individual spiritual experience. In the end, their battle would reshape not just the religious landscape of Scotland, but its entire political and social structure. This wasn't just a conflict between a queen and a preacher. This was a revolution that would change everything. Get ready to dive deeper into one of the most dramatic, personal and political conflicts in Scottish history. The epic confrontation between Mary Stuart and John Knox, a battle that would determine the fate of an entire nation. In the year 1560, something extraordinary happened in Scotland. This wasn't just a religious moment. This was a social revolution that would reshape an entire nation's spiritual and political landscape. John Knox stood at the center of a radical new vision. Imagine a church where power doesn't flow from top-down hierarchies, where bishops and priests aren't the sole gatekeepers of spiritual truth. Instead, Knox proposed something revolutionary. A church governed by its community, by the people themselves. The Presbyterian model was nothing short of a spiritual democracy. Where the Catholic Church had created a rigid pyramid of power with the Pope at the top and ordinary people at the bottom, Knox turned everything upside down. He believed that every member of the congregation should have a voice, that spiritual leadership should be collective, transparent, and accountable. This wasn't just about religious practice. This was a fundamental reimagining of social organization. The Presbyterian model suggested that ordinary people could govern themselves, could make collective decisions, could challenge authority. It was a radical concept that would extend far beyond the church walls. Think about the historical context. In a time when most institutions were deeply hierarchical, when kings and priests held absolute power, Knox was proposing a revolutionary model of shared governance. The Presbyterian Church became a training ground for democratic thinking, a place where people learned to debate, to vote, to make collective decisions. The impact was profound. The Presbyterian model didn't just change how people worshipped, it changed how people thought about power, about community, about their own role in society. It was a spiritual and political laboratory that would help shape the future of Scotland. And here's a fascinating twist. Remember that John Knox was once a galley slave, chained and powerless. Now he was creating a system that would give power back to the ordinary people. His personal experience of oppression had directly influenced his vision of a more democratic, more just society. By 1560, the Scottish Reformation was complete. The Presbyterian Church was established, and it would become a defining characteristic of Scottish identity. This wasn't just a religious change. This was a complete social transformation. So let me ask you something. Do you think the Presbyterian Church still influences Scotland today? How much of modern Scottish identity can be traced back to this radical moment of religious and social revolution? If you're loving this deep dive into history, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles. We're bringing you the stories that shaped our world, stories of revolution, of courage, of ordinary people changing history. Drop a comment below and tell us, how do you think religious movements can transform entire societies? We can't wait to hear your thoughts. The Scottish Reformation wasn't just a religious movement, it was a social earthquake that would reshape every aspect of Scottish life. Imagine a revolution so powerful that it didn't just change how people prayed, but transformed how they thought, learned, and governed themselves. Education became the unexpected battleground of this spiritual revolution. The Presbyterian leaders had a radical idea. Every single person should be able to read the Bible for themselves, no more relying on priests to interpret Scripture. They wanted every man, woman, and child to have direct access to religious knowledge. Suddenly, schools were sprouting up across Scotland like wildfire. These weren't just religious institutions, they were centers of learning, of critical thinking, of empowerment. The Reformation brought with it a democratization of knowledge. Learning wasn't a privilege for the elite anymore, it was a right for everyone. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. These schools weren't just teaching religious texts. They became centers of broader learning, creating a culture of intellectual curiosity that would ultimately transform Scottish society. Reading the Bible became a gateway to reading everything else: history, philosophy, science. The political implications were enormous. The Presbyterian model of church governance, with its emphasis on collective decision-making, on giving every member a voice, was like a training ground for democracy. Before formal democratic institutions existed, the church was teaching people how to debate, how to vote, how to challenge authority respectfully. Imagine local church councils where ordinary people, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, would gather to make collective decisions. This wasn't just about religious matters. These were essentially small-scale democratic experiments happening in every Scottish community. People were learning the skills of negotiation, of compromise, of collective problem-solving. This new approach challenged centuries of hierarchical thinking. In the old system, power flowed from the top down, from the monarch, from the church hierarchy. The Reformation introduced a radical new concept. Power could flow from the bottom up. Every individual had a voice. Every community had a say. The ripple effects would be felt for generations. The Scottish Enlightenment, that incredible period of intellectual and scientific breakthrough, can trace its roots directly to this moment. A society that learned to question religious authority would soon learn to question everything else too. It wasn't just about religion anymore, it was about creating a new kind of society, more educated, more democratic, more focused on individual empowerment. The Scottish Reformation was creating a blueprint for modern social organization. So next time you think about religious movements, remember this: sometimes a spiritual revolution can completely transform a nation's DNA. The Scottish Reformation wasn't just changing how people prayed, It was reimagining what it meant to be a society. In the year 1572, John Knox drew his final breath. But make no mistake, this was not an ending. This was the beginning of a legacy that would echo through centuries, reshaping not just Scotland, but the entire world. Imagine a single man's vision so powerful that it would continue to influence generations long after his death. Knox wasn't just a religious leader. He was a cultural architect who fundamentally redesigned the Scottish national identity. The Presbyterian Church he created wasn't just a religious institution, it became the very heartbeat of Scottish culture. Its principles of collective governance, of individual spiritual empowerment, would become deeply woven into the Scottish national character. This wasn't just a church, it was a blueprint for an entire way of life. Look at modern Scotland, and you'll see Knox's fingerprints everywhere. The Scottish commitment to education, trace it back to those first Presbyterian schools. The national tendency to question authority, to value individual thought, that's the direct legacy of Knox's revolutionary thinking. The Presbyterian Church didn't just survive, it thrived. It spread beyond Scotland's borders, carrying with it those radical ideas of democratic governance and individual spiritual autonomy. From the Highlands of Scotland to the far corners of the world, the Presbyterian movement became a powerful force of social transformation. But here's something truly remarkable. Knox's revolution wasn't just about replacing one religious system with another. It was about creating a new way of thinking, a way that valued individual interpretation, that challenged absolute authority, that believed every person had the right to understand and interpret spiritual truth for themselves. Centuries later, the spirit of John Knox lives on. When you see the Scottish commitment to social justice, to education, to collective decision-making, you're seeing the long shadow of the Reformation, a revolution that started in churches and pulpits, ultimately reshaped an entire nation's DNA. Think about the global impact. The Presbyterian model of governance would influence democratic movements around the world. The emphasis on education, on individual empowerment, would become cornerstone principles of modern social organization. John Knox died in 1572, but his revolution, that was just getting started. So here's a question for you. Can you think of other moments in history where a single individual's vision transformed an entire society? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you've loved diving into this incredible historical journey, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. We're not just telling history, we're uncovering the extraordinary stories that shaped our world. We've journeyed through an incredible story, a tale that proves how one person, armed with nothing more than conviction and courage, can transform an entire nation. The Scottish Reformation wasn't just a religious movement, it was a revolution that rewrote the rules of society, challenged absolute power, and gave birth to a new way of thinking about community, education, and personal freedom. John Knox started as a galley slave, literally chained and powerless. He ended up becoming the most powerful spiritual and social revolutionary in Scottish history. From complete oppression to ultimate liberation, his story is a testament to the incredible potential of human determination. Think about the world we live in today. How many of our current ideas about democracy, about individual rights, about the power of community can be traced back to moments like these? The Scottish Reformation wasn't just changing how people prayed, it was creating a blueprint for modern society. And now I want to turn the spotlight on you. How do you see religion influencing society today, in a world that's constantly changing, where traditional institutions are being challenged? What role do spiritual movements play in shaping our collective future? This isn't just history. This is a living, breathing story that continues to unfold. Every social movement, every moment of transformation starts with individuals who dare to challenge the status quo. If you've loved diving deep into this incredible journey through Scottish history, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves history, who loves stories of human courage and transformation. Subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles and join us as we continue exploring the incredible stories that shaped our world. Because history isn't just about the past, it's about understanding how ordinary people can do extraordinary things. It's about recognizing that every single one of us has the potential to create change. Until our next historical adventure, keep questioning, keep learning, keep exploring.